This one is just above the trellis, so I'm just gonna pinch it off, just pinching off the top of it. This one well above the trellis, I'll cut it there. This one gets cut right about there. Now once these are pruned and they lateral out, and those laterals make berries, leave them alone. So in the past I've preached to you that you need to prune your canes when they hit the top wire of your trellis, and yes, you should have a trellis. We'll talk about that in a minute. But on these are much taller than the trellis, and they are because I have been waiting to show you, and I've just let them get mighty tall. So here's the top of my trellis wire, which is about 30 inches above the root of the plant. So just above the wire, I'm going to come in here and I'm going to prune those off. Now typically I'm going to pinch off the cane when it hits the top wire, but again, I'll let these go too far for an opportunity to show you. Well, let me show you what I'm talking about when I say pinch them off. Typically when the canes will reach the top of the trellis, the top wire of the trellis, I have 2 wires on this trellis, I will just come in here and just pinch those off. Now this is 6 inches, 8 inches above the top of the trellis. I could have come down here, but I just wanted to show you a pinch off. And this one here, I'll just pinch that off because it's at the top wire of the trellis. Now when you prune these berries or pinch them off like I just did, what that will force them to do is start making lateral canes. I'll show you some laterals in a minute because I've already got some started, because I have been pinching some of these off, but a lot of these I just waited till I can get an opportunity to shoot a video and want you to see it. Again, this one is well above the trellis. I'm gonna nip that right there. And what I'm doing is clipping it right above, an inch or 2 above a place where it's going to start branching out, start lateraling, making lateral. Now this one here is well above where I want it to be. It's about 2 feet above the trellis, and it's already starting to lateral, and I'll show you that. And I'm coming in here right here, and by the way, that makes a perfect cutting for propagation. So if you want to propagate, don't throw these cuttings away. I would suggest that the cuttings be 8 to 12 inches long. There's another one that's well above the trellis. I'll come in here and clip that off. Good, nice cutting right there for propagation. My neighbor wants these to propagate, and that's basically what I'll do when I go to propagate it. I'll cut it back all the way to just the top. If it's a terminal end like this is, I'll cut it back to the top, maybe leave 1 little leaf or 2 leaves on it, probably like that, and that will get stuck in some potting mix and propagated. This one I've already tied to the trellis, that orange tape there. I've already tied it to the trellis, but I did not pinch it off. So I'm going to do that now, cut it off. Another good cutting for propagation. This one here, above the trellis, cut it off. Another good candidate, a little short, but a good candidate for propagation. This is a nice little cluster. I haven't tied any of these. This one is well above the trellis, so I'll cut it there. If you don't know what I mean when I say that tie right there, that orange tie, you need to watch my tying video, because there's a fantastic little tool that will save you hours of time and frustration by tying your blackberries, tomatoes, cucumbers, peas, any kind of vining vegetable or fruit, grapes obviously. You can use that tying tool on it. It's a wonderful little tool. This one well above the trellis. I'll cut it there. This one gets cut right about there. And all these are just going to be 6 inches or so above the top wire of my trellis. Now, if you don't know how to make a trellis, this is the simplest trellis you could possibly make, and it works great. I've never had any problems with it. Now that one I did pinch off earlier, and I'll try to get you a closer shot of that so you can see what happens when you do pinch them off. This one got tied but not pinched off, so I will cut it off now. The tie will hold it to the trellis. Here's another one above the trellis. This is the trellis wire. I hope you can see that. I'll go above the trellis, This one is just above the trellis, so I'm just going to pinch it off, just pinching off the top of it, just the very top of it. It's not something you can propagate, but it's all that cane needs because I caught it in time. Typically, I'll come in here on a timely basis, once every 2 or 3 days, and just to look and see what needs pruning. Here's one here that's just barely at the top of the trellis. I'm going to wait a few more days on that, as well as this one too. I want it to be tall enough that I can tie it, and if that's just barely tall enough, and if I clip it off, I'm not going to be able to tie it to that wire. So I want to make sure I've got enough height to tie these to the trellis also. Some of them don't need tying, some of them will stay in place like they are, but the ones that are leaning outwards, once they get really full of vegetation and then even full of blackberries, they will get real heavy. Wind will knock them down, can break them off. Now here's a cluster of quite a few that haven't been clipped. I'll just clip those off there. They're right here on the trellis. They're leaning outward on the trellis. This one here, I'll clip up there. This is the very end of my trellis, and I'll cut that there. Now I've read some things online that says the primocanes, specifically the Primark Freedoms, should be cut. One article said prune at about 12 to 18 inches tall. I just don't understand why anybody would want to do that. So that is not my recommendation. And I've been doing it this way for several years. I've been growing Primark Freedoms for several years. This one got outside my wire, so I'll bring it inside the wire, and then I'll just pinch it off. This one was inside the wire, but it's a little tall. I'll take that off. This one has gotten tall. Again, I let these grow. I've been looking at them for several days knowing I needed to do this, but I've been letting enough of them grow to where I could give you a good video on how to prune. So that's what's happening here. Now I've got some real good laterals on one I do want to show you. This one is just above the wire, maybe 6 inches above the wire. I'm gonna take that top off, just pinch it off. Now I don't know whether you can see it, but this is a great example of laterals. I pinched this one off a good while ago. You can see the top there where I pinched it right there. And that's a lateral that's about 8 or 10 inches long. This is a lateral that's about 12 inches long. So all these are lateral. That's a lateral. That's where the berries are going to make, or the majority of the berries are going to make on those lateral canes. Now these are already tied. You can see my orange ribbon on there. Those two get pruned. This one's already pruned and got 2 different laterals coming out of it at the top. And in case you didn't know, this propagation is the way for you to get free plants. It's not something I can sell because these plants are patented, but it's a way to get free plants as I understand the law, and I am not a lawyer, nor do I play one on YouTube, but as I did read it, and as I understand it, you can propagate for your own purposes, for your own use. To replace, maybe you got a gap in the row, one of them died or something like that, you can propagate to expand your field. This one is not quite at the top wire, as you can see. I'm gonna leave it alone, let it get about another 6 or 8 inches tall, then I'll prune it and tie it right there at the top of that wire. I'm gonna come in here and prune that, a good candidate for propagation. So what will happen to these that I'm trimming off, that I'm pruning, is they will start forming those laterals like we already talked about, and then they will start fruiting. That right there is blooms in the making. Those are going to be blackberries. They're on the top, very top of a cane that actually I didn't prune. I have found that on the primocane berries, this year's canes, the canes that come up this year, on the primocane berries, most of the berries make on like a terminal end, at the very end of a cane, which means the more laterals you have, those laterals are going to have ends on them. Those laterals will produce berries. In fact, I would wait on pruning the laterals. If they get 12 inches long and are not producing yet, I believe I'd wait till they got 16, 18, something like that, and see if you don't start seeing blooms on them. And I believe they're going to produce some good summer berries for you if you'll leave the canes alone. Now, no, you don't need to let them get super long. I've had canes get long enough that they go to the go over to the neighboring plant and well beyond, because I just didn't see them. There's so much vegetation. So there's some blooms right below this one. Another set of blooms. Nice blooms. Again, it's on the very terminal end, which is in the summertime where most of the berries seem to make. Most of the berries on the primocanes, the first year canes. All these canes come up this year. You know, the terminology sometimes scares people, but primocane means one. Prime means one, and all these are first year canes, year number one canes. They will also produce next year. Do not, once you prune them off and once the berries come, these canes will continue to live and produce even a larger crop next spring. Now once these are pruned and they lateral out, and those laterals make berries, leave them alone. They'll make berries probably all summer long. They'll make berries even into the fall. Now in a real hot summer, if you get real hot, they'll slow way down. They'll slow way down. They're probably not going to bloom for a while. So if you have primocanes, and that's the first thing you need to establish, is whether or not you have primocane variety or not. If you do, prune like this on the first year canes that have come up. Let them lateral, let them produce berries all summer long, and then leave them alone. Now, if you've got some laterals that have gotten 4, 5, 6 feet long, and you just forgot them or they got away from you, whatever, then after they fruit, yes, you can go ahead and cut those off. But don't prune them back to the ground like you would a floor cane that produces. That's what a lot of people get a little confused about, is when to prune out the old canes. When these canes begin to die, which will be next spring and summer, these canes will produce fruit now, they will produce fruit next spring, and then they will die, and they will send up brand new canes that look just like these to replace them from the mother plant. That's when you prune out the old canes. Always wait till they really show signs of being spent and dying, just to make sure you don't cut out any new cane, because when it's time to cut out the old canes, it's also time for these to really be vigorous and growing. So you don't want to get in there and cut out any of your canes for next year, these primocanes. So that is a pretty good stand of blackberries right there, and they're going to produce a mountain of blackberries this summer and even more next spring. If I fertilize and water right, do everything right, they will reward me for everything I've done. So I hope I made this clear enough to where you understand. I get more questions about pruning than I do just about anything else. And if it's primocane, this is the way you prune. Leave them alone. They will produce this year in the summer on these canes that I were just pruning, brand new canes that just came up, and they will also produce on those same canes, these same canes, also produce berries next spring, and then they will die. That's when you prune them out, when they begin to die. By that time, they'll have brand new canes like these coming up, and then you'll take out all the old, dead, spent canes. That'll be next year. But for right now, prune them out like this. If you don't have a trellis, this is the simplest trellis you could possibly want. Look up in the corner right there, and I'll show you how to build it. All right, we're gone.